friends, welcome back to Colliding Worldviews. It's great to have you with me here today and my next guest, and she is Elrita Dodds. You can find her website, elritadodds.com. That'll be on the bottom of your screen, but she has written a number of books. Elrita, welcome to Colliding Worldviews.
Thank you so much, Tony. I really appreciate you inviting me on. Blessing.
It's great to have you here, Elrita. The books that you've written, they're just as timely today as when you wrote them. The book that we're talking about today in particular, The Trouble with Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, another message to the black man in America. You wrote that in 1997, and yet it's just as timely today as when you wrote it. But you've written other books as well. So I want to give audience a little bit of your background. What books have you written in the area of Christian apologetics?
Well, I've written about 5 or 6 books in the area of Christian apologetics. My latest book is entitled, and that was it was published in July of last year, "The Right to be Christian in a Gay Rights America," and the subtitle is "A Biblical and Constitutional Defense Against the Persecution of Christians Who Do Not Support Homosexuality." So. What I'm doing is I'm not castigating gays or berating them, but what I'm doing is I'm giving Christians a tool to defend themselves, those who will not compromise on this particular arena, because there have been a lot of Christians these days who have lost businesses and things of that sort, gone to jail or what have you, or been sued because they refuse to compromise on that. And then, as far as the other apologetic books I've written, I have written 3 books that deal with racism and slavery. The Lord, in early 90s, actually 1990, I believe he was calling me to write books that defend the faith in particular subjects. And those subjects are slavery, racism, chauvinism, and homosexuality. And so I finally gotten them all written. But my earlier books have to do with the racism and slavery issue. Those are big social issues in our country. And the first book I wrote was What the Bible Really Says About Slavery. That's a revised version of the initial book that I wrote in 1995, Slaves Obey Your Masters. And so that's What the Bible Really Says About Slavery, and I get into a talk about what it does say about slavery. I conclude that slavery, and we'll talk about some of that today, slavery in America was a sin, although slavery in and of itself is not necessarily a sin, but slavery in America definitely was. And then I wrote The Trouble with Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. I was talking about how this group, it was very influential in the Christian arena. They teach a different doctrine and philosophy and theology than Christianity does. But a lot of ministers were embracing the Nation of Islam and Farrakhan because of the Million Man March and things of that sort. And so I dealt with racism on that end. Louis Farrakhan said a lot of things that Elijah Muhammad, the person who basically was the successor to the Nation of Islam, said. And a lot of those things were racist statements against white people, along with the theology that went along with it, that really did not go along with Christianity at all. So that was my concern, that a lot of black people were being influenced by him because he's very charismatic, and the Nation of Islam was talking about black unity, and with all of the institutional racism that's been going on in the province and the racial divide in America, they were very powerful and influential. And then in 2010, I wrote a book entitled Racism, the Bible, and the American Dream. Now, that's when I talk about the other half of it. I deal with the institutional racism against minorities, against blacks. I talk about the various history of racism in America. I start off, with basically actually the Native Americans, and I move on up through Jim Crow and institutional racism. And then I have a segment in the book that basically explains that the Bible is not racist. And unfortunately, the Bible has been misused to justify racism against minorities, against black people. And all this has had a huge effect on the spirituality of black people in this country. So I wrote about these. I wrote about these things. The one about chauvinism, is God a chauvinist? That's dealing with what the Bible says about women, because there's a lot of people that feel that the Bible is chauvinistic and sexist against women. So I debunk all of that in that book. In that book, I published in 2002 under Press Mark Publications. I'm an independent publisher, and the other books, The Trouble with Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, I published that book under Press Mark Publications. I'm doing business as that, as well as my latest book, The Right to be Christian and a Gay Right to America, and What the Bible Really Says About Slavery. And so these are the apologetic books that I've written, and basically what I'm doing is following what I believe the Lord has told me to do as far as defending the faith in these very sensitive social issue areas. But, oftentimes there's not a lot of material like this out there. Now there are more and more as far as racism and things of that sort, talking about these things. There is an apologetics field that has propped up now in the last, I'd say maybe 5 to 7 years, called urban apologetics, that addresses some of these issues. And so anyway, as far as the sayings that go, through the 30s and 40s and the 50s, 60s, growing up Black in America, oftentimes you would hear sayings like, well, the Bible is the white man's religion, white people are devils, and things of that sort. A lot of that stemmed from the teachings of Wallace Fard, who was the person who basically began the Nation of Islam in the 1930s, and Elijah Muhammad was his successor. And Farrakhan went ahead and took that mantle, and with being so charismatic, was kept that influence in the Black community up. And it was stated through that theology that Islam was the natural or true religion of the Black man. And so there you have some history of that.
Excellent. And as I said, folks, if you pick up all of her books, you're going to be able to deal with probably half of the topics that come up all the time when you're talking with non-Christians. LGBTQ, racism in the Bible, is it there? No, it's not, but she'll let you know exactly why it's not. Now, of course, slavery did happen, and there are people who try to use the Bible to justify that. But in reality, if we take the Bible in context, we find that all people are made in the image of God. It doesn't matter if you're a man, a woman, if you're white, if you're Black, if you're Asian, etc. We all have intrinsic human rights. We have intrinsic human value. And of course, Jesus Christ died for all people who repent and put their trust in him. Having said that, again, get all of her books. Go to elrita.com to get all of them. Go to Amazon. They're all available there as well. Now, today in particular, we're talking about a book that she wrote in 1997. And yes, is just as timely today as when she wrote it. And it is called The Trouble with Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, Another Message to the Black Man in America. And in this first episode that we do with El Rita, we are asking, is Islam the true religion of the Black man? In the second episode, we will ask, is Christianity the white man's religion? Now, Rita, as you said, urban apologetics, that's getting more popular. Many people hear about the Black Hebrew Israelites who, when I first heard about them, I was like, okay, this is pretty much like everyone who is part of the Nation of Islam just converted to Judaism, because we get that same mixture of racism combined with a particular religious view, and then, of course, tons of Bible verses taken out of context in order to justify it. But is the Black Hebrew Israelites similar to the NOI, or the Nation of Islam, in that regard?
Well, the Black Hebrew Israelites, I looked at them, and basically, my understanding is that they believe that the white people are the Edomites, all right, and that they're a cursed group of people, and that Black people are the real chosen people in the Bible. They're the real Jews. So that's where they take things from. They go from there. Now, the Nation of Islam doesn't really, basically the Nation of Islam says they teach that Black people are God's chosen people. So they don't necessarily teach that Black people are Jews, but that Black people are the chosen people, and that white people are a muted race of people grafted in, years ago. And so oftentimes they might not teach, like Farrakhan might not teach this during his speeches directly, but if you look back into their theology, this is what their basic theology says. The Nation of Islam started, we'll go all the way back to Timothy Drew, who changed his name to Noble Drew Ali. He was born in 1886, and he developed what's called the Moorish Science Temple. And he felt that all blacks should be considered Asian, and that whites were going to perish, and he ascribed to the Quran, and he felt that every race should have their own religion, and that Christianity was the white man's religion. He started saying that in Islam was the Asian religion and the religion for the black man. And then he died early at the age of 43 in 1929. And then Marcus Garvey was a Jamaican who associated with Drew. He was, into his teachings, or at least he was around during Drew's time. And he had a Back to Africa movement that didn't really go anywhere. Liberia had opened up and said that they would be okay with that, but then France and Britain opposed of it and convinced Liberia not to do it and things of that sort. But this is what Marcus Garvey was trying to do. But Marcus Garvey was also into separation of the races. He had a Back to Africa movement. He started the Universal Negro Improvement Association. It was all basically race oriented, and he said that Jesus cannot be the God of the black man. He was a white man's God, because he would see, when he went into homes and just going around America, he would see pictures of Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ was depicted as white. And of course, by this time, many black people felt that the Bible and Christianity was the reason for slavery, because unfortunately you had white people, what they were doing was they were trying to justify the kind of slavery that was imposed upon black people by saying that the Bible cursed blacks to be slaves, and that the Bible condoned all of this mistreatment, which, if you really read certain scriptures in the Bible, we'll see that's not true. But a lot of black Americans, African Americans, don't really know that those scriptures are there oftentimes. Then Wallace Fard came into the picture after Marcus Garvey. And Wallace Fard, he was associated with the Moorish Temple Society, or the Moorish Science Temple. And he began walking around the streets of Detroit in 1930, selling wares and things of that sort. But he was promoting this separation of the races as well. And he began saying that, and this was in Detroit, and he was the first person to call white people blue-eyed devils and things of this sort. So all of this with Timothy Drew, Noble Drew Ali, Marcus Garvey, all of their thinking regarding all of this that stemmed from the slavery area, Wallace Fard picked that up, and he began saying that he was the supreme ruler of the universe. Black people began believing him, and then Elijah Muhammad, who was born in 1897, was schooled by Wallace Fard, and the Nation of Islam calls Wallace Fard Fard Muhammad, and they believe that Fard Muhammad is God in the flesh, just like we believe that we know that Jesus Christ is God in the flesh, but of course there are proofs that there's proofs that Jesus Christ is God in the flesh. No, there's no proof that Wallace Fard is. Okay. No miracles, he did not fulfill the messianic prophecies or anything like that. But that's what the Nation of Islam believes, not Orthodox Islam. And so Elijah Muhammad wrote a book in 1965 entitled "Message to the Black Man in America," where he said, the Bible is the white man's religion. The Bible is, basically. He would say that it's the white man's religion, and it's a black slave-making religion. He's quoted as saying that, and the Nation of Islam has basically been perpetrating that. And that was my concern with them, were these teachings that went against the Bible and made the Bible the culprit of the type of slavery that was imposed upon Africans and blacks, and therefore pitted blacks against Christianity. But if you read the Bible, you will see that that's farthest from the truth. One basic problems as far as people believing that the Bible condoned racism and slavery. It has to do with the account of Noah in Genesis. When Noah gets drunk, he does something that's bad, and his sons, Shem and Japheth, he had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And Shem and Japheth cover Noah up. They cover him up. And this is in Genesis 9, if anybody wants to read it. So they cover him up. They walk backwards with a blanket. This is what the account tells us, and they cover him up. However, Ham saw his father's nakedness, and then when Noah found this out, there was a disrespect, and Noah cursed Canaan, which was Ham's son, to be a slave of Japheth and Shem. Now, through the years, during the medieval times, this turned into somehow the black curse, and there was a lot of teachings going on, and especially during the American slave era, where whites had to justify the slavery of blacks, and they would use this particular passage to say, well, blacks are cursed to be slaves because Ham was black, and Shem was the father. The Jews came from him, and Japheth was white, and all the races came through these 3 people. Which, if you look up the Hebrew, none of these names, they'll say, well, Ham means black, and Japheth means Shem means olive colored, and Japheth means white. And so, since Ham's son was cursed to be a slave of Shem and Japheth and their descendants, then that means, and since Ham was black, then that means all black people are cursed to be slaves. And this was the black, the cursed black myth, that have gone down through the centuries, especially the white people. White slave masters really took that and ran with it. The thing is, when you really read the passage, there is absolutely, first of all, no indication that Ham means black and Shem means olive-colored and Japheth means white. That's not in there. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Hebrew, there are different meanings. I think Ham means hot or warm, and Shem means fame or reputation, and Japheth means open or something like that. It has nothing to do with race. And then, of course, this was the Canaanites were the ones who were cursed to be, who were cursed to be slaves under Shem and Japheth. And then if we keep reading, we see that the Canaanites are, their generation has passed, and they're no longer here. Even if the Canaanites had dark skin, or they were brown skin or black, that certainly doesn't mean that since that particular group of people, that nation of people were cursed to be slaves, then therefore any skin characteristic that they would have, all of those people in the world would also be cursed to be slaves. That's foolishness. That would be like saying, well, if Canaan had big feet, then anybody in the world who had big feet were cursed to be slaves. And but however, and unfortunately, this kind of misrepresentation of the Bible has gone on through the years. And then when you have the Nation of Islam saying, well, Christianity is a black slave-making religion, and then you couple that, that's what Elijah Muhammad taught, and then you couple that with this black cursed mythology, this misrepresentation of the Bible that a lot of white slave masters put out there. And then, of course, it was illegal for blacks to even read the Bible when they were enslaved during that time. Then you have all this misconception about what the Bible really says about slavery, and it's an issue, and it has, and that's why I've written the books that I've written, because I feel that because of these issues in our country, a lot of black people in our country have been they have been given the wrong information throughout centuries, or years, or what have you, regarding these things. And I am trying to say, no, the Bible is not a black slave-making religion. Blacks are not cursed to be slaves. The Bible does not condone the type of slavery that was imposed upon blacks. As a matter of fact, we have scripture in Deuteronomy that says, in the Old Testament, if you stole somebody, if you kidnapped somebody and enslaved them, it was punishable by death, and things of that sort. And I can give some of those scriptures if we have enough time. I don't know if we do, but
Rita,
there's so much that goes against that. Yes.
The interesting part is that when we ask, is Islam the true religion of the black man? To think about the fact that the Nation of Islam started, less than 100 years ago, and to review what you had mentioned earlier about W.D. Fard, who, claim, when people hear, Nation of Islam, they think, this is equivalent to your Islam according to Muhammad. But of course, that's not the case. When we find that Fard believed that he was God. And of course, from him, you have Elijah Muhammad. And of course, even Malcolm X is brought into the equation here as well, because he was part of this, although he started to lean more towards Orthodox Islam than Fard did and Elijah Muhammad, and lean more towards that. But then you have the NOI being a religion where we still see today there are many people joining it. It's very prominent in prisons. Of course, Orthodox Islam as well. Many people are. There's just a news story that came out the other day about people who are intimidated and beaten up if they don't join Islam. Usually, I'm not sure if this is the NOI in particular, but of Orthodox Islam. I just saw a news story about that the other day. So prominent there. Prominent, of course, in public. Especially if you're in an urban area, you'll see Black Hebrew Israelites. You'll see people who are part of the Nation of Islam, but it's not Islam according to Muhammad, and we want to make that clear for people. At the same time, is Islam the true religion of the black man? This is interesting because not only is this a claim of the NOI, but this is something that the Orthodox Islamists will kind of use as well, saying, look, blackness in Islam. They use this tactic nowadays to, reach out pretty much to African Americans, not to get them to the NOI, but just to say, hey, you're a minority. We want you to join with us, of course, to become the majority, ultimately, not the minority. So interesting dynamic here, how this all works out. But you talk about Orthodox Islam in your book, and you make distinctions between that and the Nation of Islam. Just for about a minute, we only have about maybe 5 minutes left in this episode. Take a minute, though, and explain the differences between the Nation of Islam and Orthodox Islam.
Well, the Nation of Islam, they believe that Wallace Fard is God incarnate. They also believe that Elijah Muhammad is the Messiah. And the Orthodox Islam does not believe that at all. Orthodox Islam believes that, that there is one God now. And they do not believe that God came in the form of a man, which is why they are totally different as well as far as what Christians believe. That's basically the difference between Orthodox Islam and the Nation of Islam, is that the Nation of Islam sees Wallace Fard as God in the flesh and Elijah Muhammad as Messiah. And they just, and they don't. They see God as, God. And they don't see God as having a son. Christianity, of course, we see, one God exists in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. They don't. Orthodox Islam doesn't agree with that, and neither does the Nation of Islam. But Orthodox Islam does not agree with what the Nation of Islam. They feel that, and they are right, that the Nation of Islam is a cult of Orthodox Islam. And I thought it was good that you mentioned Malcolm X. He was introduced to the Nation of Islam in prison, just like a whole lot of people, men are today. And the Nation of Islam is often a stepping stone into Orthodox Islam. So although Orthodox Islam and Nation of Islam disagree theologically, the Orthodox Islam doesn't really come out against the Nation of Islam too much because they know that the Nation of Islam is a stepping stone into Orthodox Islam. And so Malcolm X was introduced to the Nation of Islam when he was in prison. That was in, well, he was born in 1925. He was in prison. And however, yes, he got into Orthodox Islam. He got away from the Nation of Islam because he found out that Elijah Muhammad was doing some things with young girls. And he mentioned those things, and he got away. He went into Orthodox Islam, and of course, the Nation of Islam is very upset with Malcolm X. And it's the understanding is that there were people from Nation of Islam that assassinated him. That's when Louis Farrakhan took over the Nation of Islam. Well, basically, let me correct myself, because Elijah Muhammad's son took over the nation, and he was not really teaching the doctrines like they had been taught,
El Rita, please take 30 seconds to answer this question. The question is Islam the true religion of the black man? We know that NOI is a cult in comparison to Orthodox Islam. But for any Nation of Islam people who say that Islam's the true religion of the black man, please share with our audience, again, take about 30 seconds to do this, what we find in the Orthodox Islam when it comes to African Americans and slavery.
Yeah. Yes. So, no, Islam is not the religion of the black man, because what we find is that the Africans that were taken from North America and west side of Africa and brought into the transatlantic slave trade, many of them were Islamic, but they were Muslims by force. Many of the before they were even brought into the transatlantic slave trade, Islamic Arabs enslaved Africans and forced them to convert from Christianity into Islam. And so to say that Islam is the natural or true religion of the black man, Africans were Christians before they were Islamic. And this is well documented in history. And the Arab Islamic tribes that went over in the 7th century and enslaved many of the Africans, there was more enslavement of the Africans with them than there was enslavement of the Africans in the transatlantic slave trade. And a lot of people don't know that. So that's extremely important to know.
Rita Dodds, thank you so much for being here on this episode. Again, is Islam the true religion of the black man? Quick answer, no, it is not. There's actually a show that I did with Dr. J. Smith about this very subject, and it was the hidden Islamic slave trade and colorism. Rita, as you said, the Islamic slave trade, which just so happens to still be in existence today, was actually bigger than the transatlantic one, and they were shipped in much worse conditions. And of course, many of them were killed because there's a whole different agenda of why they had slavery versus the transatlantic, which was for workers. It was different, of course, when it came to Islam and their purpose of slaves. Thank you so much for being here on this episode. We're going to have Rita back for another episode when we ask the question, is Christianity the white man's religion? Please, again, check out our website, elritadodds.com. Get her books, and we'll see you next time on Colliding Worldviews.